Oh, my heavens. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Sorry I'm running a little bit late. I didn't fall asleep until 5 o'clock in the morning last night, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And then I'm just tweaking my lighting here. It's a little better. Then I banged my knee really hard on the edge of a bass drum. Why do I even have a bass drum? I don't play the drums. Somebody offered me a free drum kit, and I was interested in learning to play brushed snare. And I figured that would be the cheapest way for me to get a snare and brushes, was to take this entire drum kit. As a result, I have a bass drum in my bedroom that's just sitting there being in the way. And I banged my knee into it today really hard. And just, threw off my whole day. Oh, my book from this morning is still out on the balcony. Gotta remember to go get that. Anyway, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of the Isolated Literary Society presents Jane Austen's Persuasion. Persuasion. So yeah, let's see. Where did we
I feel like exciting things were happening.
Yeah, what was happening? So Mr. Elliot has been paying quite a lot of attention to the family. Anne is in Bath now with her sister and her dad and Lady Russell, all the worst people.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Clay, also not great. We don't know that much about Mrs. Clay, honestly. I actually feel like I have a hard time judging just from the book, like what is Mrs. Clay actually all about? Like, is she really super conniving? Like, clearly Lady Russell doesn't thinks she's only, hanging out with Elizabeth because money. And everyone is worried, not everyone, Anne is worried that Mrs. Clay's trying to marry her dad, and like Elizabeth likes her, so that doesn't exactly, that's not exactly like a point in her favor.
Right.
But I feel like we don't actually get a lot of what Mrs. Clay's deal is yet, anyway. Anyway, also some rich people with a title show up in Bath, and they're like tangentially related, like distant cousins.
Oh yes.
Of Sir Walter, and so they managed to like get in with these people who turn out to be like not great or interesting people. They're really boring and lame, but. Yeah, Sir Walter and Elizabeth are pleased, of course. And Lady Russell's like to a slightly lesser degree. It's like, oh, well, I was hoping they would also be like interesting people to talk to, but it doesn't hurt to be friends with titled people.
Right, yeah.
And they're titled in a way that's better than Sir Walter's title, you understand. Like,
yes.
there's different levels. He's a baronet, and
we're not quite sure how much better, but they are
she's like a viscountess. A dowager viscountess. Ooh,
yeah,
very fancy. I get the impression that they are a bigger honkin' deal.
Yes.
Anywho, so that I think is just pretty much what's going on. Mr. Elliot has been talking to Anne quite a lot. We don't have a really strong grasp on what he's actually all about yet, I feel like, still.
Yeah.
He seems to talk to Anne and not treat her like garbage, so that's like a vote in his favor.
Yes.
But he also gives off very strong Wickham vibes, so we don't trust him yet.
And he is also more on the side of being in touch with titled family for the sake of being in touch with titled people. Right, yeah. He definitely is a little more like, well, yeah, I mean, hey, it doesn't hurt. Yeah.
And Anne's like, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It hurts my soul to have to hang out with these lame people.
Yeah.
And he's like, Anyway,
but
money. He's like slightly less obvious about it, I feel like, than Lady Russell even. certainly less obvious than Sir Walter and Elizabeth, who are really blatant.
He displays more tact anyway.
Yeah, he's a little more tactful. So anyway, we still don't have a super strong grasp on his deal. And we also don't know. Oh, also, Lady Russell thinks he's trying to marry Anne, and Anne is like, he's obviously trying to marry Elizabeth.
Right.
And Lady Russell's like, oh, well, Elizabeth, I suppose.
Lady Russell just thinks that he's great. She's come around to him. And, and therefore she thinks he's worthy of Anne.
Yes, yeah. Lady Russell seems totally unconcerned with the fact that Elizabeth is the older sister. And
she's pretty much the only person who thinks that he's interested in Anne. But.
Well, I mean, I kind of think he is because he actually talks to her.
That is true.
And if he was really, if he was a total jerk and he was really interested in Elizabeth, he'd take his cues from Elizabeth and probably treat Anne like garbage.
That's true, yeah, if he was only trying to get in good with her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into
tricky.
It. Chapter 17. While Sir Walter and Elizabeth were assiduously pushing their good fortune in Laura Place, that's where the Viscountess and her daughter live, Anne was renewing an acquaintance of a very different description. She had called on her former governess and had heard from her of there being an old schoolfellow in Bath who had the two strong claims on her attention of past kindness and present suffering. Miss Hamilton, now Mrs. Smith, had shown her kindness in one of those periods of her life. Had shown her kindness in one of those periods of her life when it had been most valuable. Anne had gone unhappy to school, grieving for the loss of a mother whom she had dearly loved, feeling her separation from home and suffering as a girl of 14, of strong sensibility and not high spirits, must suffer at such a time. And Miss Hamilton, 3 years older than herself, but still from the want of near relations and a settled home, remaining another year at school, had been useful and good to her in a way which had considerably lessened her misery and could never be remembered with indifference. In short, Senpai noticed her.
Yes.
Miss Hamilton had left school, had married not long afterwards, was said to have married a man of fortune, and this was all that Anne had known of her, till now that their governess's account brought her situation forward in a more decided but very different form. She was a widow and poor. Her husband had been extravagant, and at his death, about 2 years before, had left his affairs dreadfully involved. Oh, don't you hate people who leave their affairs dreadfully involved?
Yes.
So thoughtless. Yes. She had had difficulties of every sort to contend with, and in addition to these distresses, had been afflicted with a severe rheumatic fever, which finally settling in her legs had made her for the present a cripple. She had come to Bath on that account, and was now in lodgings near the hot baths, living in a very humble way, unable even to afford herself the comfort of a servant. Oh, not even that. And of course, almost excluded from society. Imagine not being able to afford a servant. Even that bare necessity.
Minimum a necessity for life.
Oh.
One of life's necessaries, as they say.
Absolutely. Their mutual friend answered for the satisfaction which a visit from Miss Elliot would give Mrs. Smith, and Anne therefore lost no time in going. I feel like there's just a million characters in this book, and I remember none of them.
Yeah.
Wait, I've already forgotten about Miss Colonel or Admiral or Captain who's he what's it, and his wife who was recently pregnant and is supposedly a very charming and beautiful woman, but they haven't met her yet.
Yeah.
Well, they're friends of Mr. Elliot's, and
That's
I almost forgot about them.
I cannot remember their name. I'm sure we shall find out again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Tila, for sure. There's also Tila mentioned, I feel like there's a movie where someone looks down on someone who has no servants. I feel like it was set in the 1850s. Yeah. Gosford Park, which is set in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s. Not totally sure. Is there's someone at this, weekend. It's a big weekend shooting party at a big country house, and one of the women doesn't have a lady's maid, and one from the house has to be lent to her. Anyway, and everyone talks about it,
but there's really no need,
especially Maggie Smith,
to wear different clothes every day.
There's no reason to wear a different gown every evening. This isn't a fashion show.
Yes.
Yes.
Must make it quite quite easier.
Yeah, if you've never seen
a lady's maid.
Yeah, if you've never seen Gosford Park, but you have seen Downton Abbey, Downton Abbey was originally envisioned as a TV version of Gosford Park, and Maggie Smith plays effectively the same character in both, and that's the only actual crossover between them. So, highly recommend it.
In terms of personality, at least.
Oh, yes. Yeah. In terms of sort of the way she behaves.
Like her position in the family is not
the same. Yeah. But yeah. In terms of her being a catty bitch who's delightful.
A thrower of shade.
Yes. She throws much shade. All right. Yes, and therefore lost no time in going. She mentioned nothing of what she had heard or what she intended at home. It would excite no proper interest there. She only consulted Lady Russell, who entered thoroughly into her sentiments, and was most happy to convey her as near to Mrs. Smith's lodgings in Westgate Buildings as Anne chose to be taken. The visit was paid, their acquaintance re-established, their interest in each other more than rekindled. The first 10 minutes had its awkwardness and its emotion. 12 years were gone since they had parted, and each presented a somewhat different person from what the other had imagined. 12 years had changed Anne from the blooming, silent, unformed girl of 15 to the elegant little woman of 27, with every beauty excepting bloom, and with manners as consciously right as they were invariably gentle. And 12 years had transformed the fine-looking, well-grown Miss Hamilton, in all the glow of health and confidence of superiority, into a poor, infirm, helpless widow, receiving the visit of her former protege as a favor. And all that was uncomfortable in the meeting had soon passed away, and left only the interesting charm of remembering former partialities and talking over older times. I appreciate that at least Lady Russell was like, but yes, of course, you should, do a pity visit on this person who you used to know. Like, obviously, she looks at it that way, whereas Anne is more like wanting to see her old friend. Yeah. But you get the feeling if Anne had mentioned this plan to Elizabeth would be like, why would you want to visit her? Yeah. Or don't visit her, look bad or something like that. Anne found in Mrs. Smith the good sense and agreeable manners which she had almost ventured to depend on, and a disposition to converse and be cheerful beyond her expectation. Neither the dissipations of the past, and she had lived very much in the world, nor the restrictions of the present, neither sickness nor sorrow seemed to have closed her heart or ruined her spirits. In the course of a second visit, she talked with great openness, and Anne's astonishment increased. She could scarcely imagine a more cheerless situation in itself than Mrs. Smith's. She had been very fond of her husband. She had buried him. She had been used to affluence. It was gone. She had no child to connect her with life and happiness again, no relations to assist in the arrangement of perplexed affairs, no health to make all the rest supportable. Her accommodations were limited to a noisy parlor and a dark bedroom behind, with no possibility of moving from one to the other without assistance, which there was only one servant in the house to afford, and she never quitted the house but to be conveyed into the warm bath. Yet in spite of all this, Anne had reason to believe that she had moments only of languor and depression, to hours of occupation and enjoyment. How could it be? She watched, observed, reflected, and finally determined that this was not a case of fortitude or resignation only. A submissive spirit might be patient, a strong understanding would supply resolution, but here was something more. Here was that elasticity of mind, that disposition to be comforted, that power of turning readily from evil to good, and of finding employment which carried her out of herself, which was from nature alone. It was the choicest gift of heaven, and Anne viewed her friend as one of those instances in which, by a merciful appointment, it seems designed to counterbalance almost every other want. If we could all be so, have such fortitude. Sorry, I lost my place. There had been a time, Mrs. Smith told her, when her spirits had nearly failed. She could not call herself an invalid now, compared with her state on first reaching Bath. Then she had been, indeed, a pitiable object, for she had caught cold on the journey, and had hardly taken possession of her lodgings before she was again confined to her bed, and suffering under severe and constant pain, and all this among strangers, with the absolute necessity of having a regular nurse, and finances at that moment particularly unfit to meet any extraordinary expense. She had weathered it, however, and could truly say that it had done her good. It had increased her comforts by making her feel herself to be in good hands. She had seen too much of the world to expect sudden or disinterested attachment anywhere, but her illness had proved to her that her landlady had a character to preserve, and would not use her ill. And she had been particularly fortunate in her nurse, as a sister of her landlady, a nurse by profession, and who had always a home in that house when unemployed, chanced to be at liberty just in time to attend her. And she, said Mrs. Smith, besides nursing me most admirably, had really proved an invaluable acquaintance. As soon as I could use my hands, she taught me to knit, which has been a great amusement, and she put me in the way of making these little thread cases, pin cushions, and card racks, which you always find me so busy about, and which supply me with the means of doing a little good to one or two very poor families in this neighborhood. She has a large acquaintance, of course, professionally, among those who can afford to buy, and she disposes of my merchandise. She always takes the right time for applying. Everybody's heart is open, you know, when they have recently escaped from severe pain or are recovering the blessing of health, and Nurse Rook thoroughly understands when to speak. She is a shrewd, intelligent, sensible woman. Hers is a line for seeing human nature, and she has a fund of good sense and observation which, as a companion, make her infinitely superior to thousands of those who, having only received the best education in the world, know nothing worth attending to. Call it gossip if you will, but when Nurse Rook has half an hour's leisure to bestow on me, she is sure to have something to relate that is entertaining and profitable, something that makes one know one's species better. One likes to hear what is going on, to be au fait, as the newest modes of being trifling and silly. To me, who live so much alone, her conversation, I assure you, is a treat. Wow, she's like too good.
Yeah.
Too disinterested and too good. Anne, far from wishing to cavil at the pleasure, replied, I can easily believe it. Women of that class have great opportunities, and if they are intelligent, may be well worth listening to. Such varieties of human nature as they are in the habit of witnessing. And it is not merely in its follies that they are well read, for they see it occasionally under every circumstance that can be most interesting or affecting. What instances must pass before them of ardent, disinterested, self-denying attachment, of heroism, fortitude, patience, resignation, of all the conflicts and all the sacrifices that ennoble us most. A sick chamber may often furnish the worth of volumes. Yes, said Mrs. Smith more doubtingly, sometimes it may, though I fear its lessons are not often in the elevated style you describe. Here and there, human nature may be great in times of trial, but generally speaking, it is its weakness and not its strength that appears in a sick chamber. It is selfishness and impatience rather than generosity and fortitude that one hears of. There is so little real friendship in the world, and unfortunately, speaking low and tremulously, there are so many who forget to think seriously till it is almost too late. Anne saw the misery of such feelings. The husband had not been what he ought, and the wife had been led among that part of mankind which made her think worse of the world than she hoped it deserved. It was but a passing emotion, however, with Mrs. Smith. She shook it off and soon added in a different tone, I do not suppose the situation of my friend Mrs. Rook is in at present will furnish much either to interest or edify me. She is only nursing Mrs. Wallace of Marlborough Buildings, a mere pretty, silly, expensive, fashionable woman, I believe, and of course will have nothing to report but of lace and finery. Now I mean to make my report of Mrs. Wallace, however. She has plenty of money, and I intend she shall buy all the high-priced things I have in hand now. Mrs. Wallace is the lady, so we have a little connection. Yeah, I like her. I also love that they start off the character kind of being like, oh, even though she's in the worst condition and she's sick and she's lost so much, she has the strongest spirit. But then when Anne tries to be a little too like, oh, yes, in the worst of times, you see the best of human nature, she's kind of like, I mean, not always. Okay. No, maybe not. Yeah, I like the nurse and I like Mrs. Smith. Anne had called several times on her friend before the existence of such a person was known in Camden Place. At last it became necessary to speak of her. Sir Walter, Elizabeth, and Mrs. Clay returned one morning from Laura Place, with a sudden invitation from Lady Dalrymple for the same evening, and Anne was already engaged to spend that evening in Westgate Buildings. She was not sorry for the excuse. They were only asked, she was sure, because Lady Dalrymple, being kept at home by a bad cold, was glad to make use of the relationship which had been so pressed on her. And she declined on her account with great alacrity. She was engaged to spend the evening with an old schoolfellow. They were not much interested in anything relative to Anne, but still there were questions enough asked to make it understood what this old schoolfellow was, and Elizabeth was disdainful, and Sir Walter severe.
Yep.
Westgate Buildings, said he, and who is Miss Anne Elliot to be visiting in Westgate Buildings? A Mrs. Smith, a widow Mrs. Smith, and who was her husband? One of the 5,000 Mr. Smiths whose names are to be met with everywhere. And what is her attraction? That she is old and sickly. Upon my word, Miss Anne Elliot, you have the most extraordinary taste. Everything that revolts other people, low company, paltry rooms, foul air, disgusting associations, are inviting to you.
Disgusting associations.
And surely you may put off this old lady till tomorrow. She is not so near her end, I presume, that she may hope to see another day. What is her age, 40?
Wow. First of all, harsh.
Hey.
Because that can't be too far off from Elizabeth's age.
Yeah, well, also, like...
Unless,
it's
wait.
also not that.
Also not that, yeah. Wait, how old? No, Anne's
27 and Elizabeth's 29.
Okay,
so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was getting my decades
Yeah.
confused. For a moment, I thought
no, it's just totally
37.
absurd for him to refer to her as an old woman just because she's a widow and is ill.
Yeah.
And Anne follows, no, sir, she is not 31, but I do not think I can put off my engagement because it is the only evening for some time which will at once suit her and myself. She goes into the warm bath tomorrow, and for the rest of the week, you know, we are engaged. But what does Lady Russell think of this acquaintance? Asked Elizabeth. She sees nothing to blame in it, replied Anne. On the contrary, she approves it, and has generally taken me when I have called on Mrs. Smith. Westgate Buildings must have been rather surprised by the appearance of a carriage drawn up near its pavement, observed Sir Walter. Sir Henry Russell's widow, indeed, has no honours to distinguish her arms, but still it is a handsome equipage, and no doubt is well known to convey a Miss Elliot. He even talks shit about Lady Russell.
Yeah.
Lady Russell's not as big a deal as we are, but she has a pretty nice carriage. And presumably people know by now that, an Elliot rides around it sometimes, which elevates it, of course.
Right,
My
yeah.
God,
yeah.
he's so redonk. Ugh. Her widow, Mrs. Smith, lodging in Westgate Buildings. A poor widow, barely able to live, between 30 and 40, a mere Mrs. Smith, and every day Mrs. Smith, of all people, in all names in the world, to be the chosen friend of Miss Anne Elliot, and to be preferred by her to her own family connections among the nobility of England and Ireland. Mrs. Smith, such a name.
God.
Wow, somebody punch him, please.
Seriously.
Please.
Dying of fire.
It's like he's especially offended by the fact that she doesn't even have like an interesting name.
Yeah.
She's just Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
Fuck you. And he talked shit about somebody else who like had a name and he was like, oh, but they're not from the
right.
whatever somebody's.
Yeah.
I don't know how these old family names get taken on by people who don't actually belong to the family. I really don't know.
Right, yeah.
What does it all mean? Blah, blah, blah.
Well, for someone who spends most of his time reading the peerage, seems like something he would focus on.
Ugh. Mrs. Clay, who had been present while all this passed, now thought it advisable to leave the room, and Anne could have said much, and did long to say little, in defense of her friends' not very dissimilar claims to theirs, but her sense of personal respect to her father prevented her. She made no reply. She left it to himself to recollect that Mrs. Smith was not the only widow in Bath, between 30 and 40, with little to live on, and no surname of dignity. Oh, I didn't even think about that. He's basically describing Mrs. Clay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hella rude, dude.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Anne kept her appointment. The others kept theirs, and of course she heard the next morning that it had a delightful evening. Sir Walter and Elizabeth had not only been quite at her ladyship's service themselves, but had actually been happy to be employed by her in collecting others, and had been at the trouble of inviting both Lady Russell and Mr. Elliot. And Mr. Elliot had made a point of leaving Colonel Wallace early, and Lady Russell had fresh arranged all her evening engagements in order to wait on her. Excuse me. Anne had the whole history of all that such an evening could supply from Lady Russell. To her, its greatest interest must be in having very much talked of between her friend and Mr. Elliot, in having been wished for, regretted, and at the same time honored for staying away in such a cause. Her kind, compassionate visits to this old schoolfellow, sick and reduced, seemed to have quite delighted Mr. Elliot. He thought her a most extraordinary young woman, in her temper, manners, mind, a model of female excellence. He could meet even Lady Russell in a discussion of her merits. And Anne could not be given to understand so much by her friend, could not know herself to be so highly rated by a sensible man, without many of those agreeable sensations which her friend meant to create. Lady Russell was now perfectly divided in her opinion of Mr. Elliot. She was as much convinced of his meaning to gain Anne in time as of his deserving her, and was beginning to calculate the number of weeks which would free him from all the remaining restraints of widowhood, and leave him at liberty to exert his most open powers of pleasing. She would not speak to Anne with half the certainty she felt on the subject. She would venture on little more than hints of what might be hereafter, of a possible attachment on his side, of the desirableness of the alliance, supposing such attachment to be real and returned. Anne heard her and made no violent exclamations. She only smiled, blushed, and gently shook her head. I am no matchmaker, as well you know, said Lady Russell. No, you're more interested in breaking up matches.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're a match breaker.
Yeah, yeah,
that's what you're known for.
I'm not a matchmaker. Understatement of several centuries. I'm no matchmaker, as you well know, said Lady Russell, being much too well aware of the uncertainty of all human events and calculations. I only mean that if Mr. Elliot should some time hence pay his addresses to you, and if you should be disposed to accept him, I think there would be every possibility of your being happy together. A most suitable connection, everybody must consider it, but I think it might be a very happy one. Mr. Elliot is an exceedingly agreeable man, and in many respects I think highly of him, said Anne, but we should not suit. And why, Anne? Why should you not suit? Well, he's not Captain Wentworth, that's why.
Yeah.
Lady Russell let this pass, and only said in rejoinder, I own that to be able to regard you as the future mistress of Kellynch, the future Lady Elliot, to look forward and see you occupying your dear mother's place, succeeding to all her rights and all her popularity as well as to all her virtues, would be the highest possible gratification to me. Oh, well, in that case, let's all arrange for it to happen.
Yes. I had forgotten that was my goal in getting married, was to provide as much gratification to you as possible.
You are your mother's self in countenance and disposition, and if I might be allowed to fancy you such as she was in situation and name and home, presiding and blessing in the same spot, the only superior to her being more highly valued, my dearest Anne, it would give me more delight than is often felt at my time of life. Who cares? Yeah. Literally, who cares about your delight?
Seriously.
Anne was obliged to turn away, to rise, to walk to a distant table, and, leaning there in pretended employment, try to subdue the feelings this picture excited. For a few moments, her imagination and her heart were bewitched. The idea of becoming what her mother had been, of having the precious name of Lady Elliot first revived in herself, of being restored to Kellynch, calling it her home again, her home forever, was a charm which she could not immediately resist. Lady Russell said not another word, willing to leave the matter to its own operation, and believing that, could Mr. Elliot at that moment with propriety have spoken for himself, she believed, in short, what Anne did not believe. The same image of Mr. Elliot speaking for himself brought Anne to composure again. The charm of Kellynch and of Lady Elliot all faded away. She never could accept him. And it was not only that her feelings were still adverse to any man save one. Her judgment, on a serious consideration of the possibility of such a case, was against Mr. Elliot. Interesting. Though they had now been acquainted a month, she could not be satisfied that she really knew his character. That he was a sensible man, an agreeable man, that he talked well, professed good opinions, seemed to judge properly, and as a man of principle, that was all clear enough. He certainly knew what was right, nor could she fix on any one article of moral duty evidently transgressed, but yet she would have been afraid to answer for his conduct. She distrusted the past, if not the present. The names which occasionally dropped of former associates, the allusions to former practices and pursuits, suggested suspicions not favorable of what he had been. She saw that there had been bad habits, that Sunday traveling had been a common thing. Oh, no, not traveling on a Sunday.
I've never heard this.
I know, I've never heard of that as like, oh, well, you know what he's like. Travels on Sundays. But I assume it's like, because, you know,
I guess
the day of rest, you should go to church and then
you're not
sit in quiet contemplation. Yeah. Read Fordyce's sermons.
I guess Sunday brunch wasn't a thing back then.
No.
Maybe you were just supposed to be like
just quiet,
sort of staid and sober all day.
Yeah. I mean, you know,
I'm sure that Kitty and Leah did not.
Yeah, well. Yeah, I've never really heard it, but I have to assume that's what
it must be. It must be.
That there had been a period of his life, and probably not a short one, when he had been, at least, careless on all serious matters. And though he might now think very differently, who could answer for the true sentiments of a clever, cautious man, grown old enough to appreciate a fair character? How could it ever be ascertained that his mind was truly cleansed? This seems a little bit judgy of Anne, but at the same time, I agree with her that I also don't feel like I was just saying, I don't feel like I've really got a handle on Mr. Elliot. Yeah. He certainly talks right, you know.
It is a little judgy. I think she's rightly wondering if he's actually changed as much as he wants us to think he's changed. Yeah. He wants them to think he's changed.
Yeah. It's just odd that she refers to general kind of behaviors rather than saying his past behavior towards her family made her wonder.
Yeah.
Anyway. Mr. Elliot was rational, discreet, polished, but he was not open. There was never any burst of feeling, any warmth of indignation or delight at the evil or good of others. This, to Anne, was a decided imperfection. Her early impressions were incurable. She prized the frank, the open-hearted, the eager character beyond all others. Warmth and enthusiasm did captivate her still. She felt that she could so much more depend upon the sincerity of those who sometimes looked or said a careless or hasty thing, than of those whose presence of mind never varied, whose tongue never slipped. Mr. Elliot was too generally agreeable. Various as were the tempers in her father's house, he pleased them all. He endured too well, stood too well with everybody. He had spoken to her with some degree of openness of Mrs. Clay, had appeared to completely see what Mrs. Clay was about, and to hold her in contempt, and yet Mrs. Clay found him as agreeable as anybody. Lady Russell saw either less or more than her young friend, for she saw nothing to excite distrust. She could not imagine a man more exactly what he ought to be than Mr. Elliot, nor did she ever enjoy a sweeter feeling than the hope of seeing him receive the hand of her beloved Anne in Kellynch Church in the course of the following autumn. Yeah, just sure pick a wedding day while you're at it.
I mean, you got to get cracking. They're not as young as they used to be.
I mean, she's probably, counting the days as to like exactly when did his wife die? When would it be appropriate?
Yeah.
And between then, how long do we have to wait before the actual wedding? And then, okay, that exact day. There you go.
That does seem a bit soon, but I suppose men probably did remarry that quickly.
Oh yeah, I get the impression that was not perhaps totally uncommon. It also wasn't. I don't think it wasn't necessarily expected.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Chapter 18. It was the beginning of February, and Anne, having been a month in Bath, was growing very eager for news from Uppercross and Lyme. She wanted to hear much more than Mary communicated. It was 3 weeks since she had heard it all. She only knew that Henrietta was at home again, and that Louisa, though considering to be recovering fast, was still at Lyme, and she was thinking of them all very intently one evening, when a thicker letter than usual from Mary was delivered to her, and to quicken the pleasure and surprise, with Admiral and Mrs. Crofts' compliments. The Crofts must be in Bath. a circumstance to interest her. They were people whom her heart turned to very naturally. "What is this?" cried Sir Walter. "The Crofts arrived in Bath? The Crofts who rent Kellynch? What have they brought you?" "A letter from Uppercross Cottage, sir." "Oh, those letters are convenient passports. They secure an introduction. I should have visited Admiral Croft, however, at any rate. I know it is due to my tenant."
"Do you?"
Well, yes, people will just carry a letter thanklessly without any, just to be nice, just to get an introduction. Rude. "Oh, but I should visit them, Lord of Banner, blah, 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 blah." Harumph. Yeah. Anne could listen no longer. She could not even have told you how the poor Admiral's complexion escaped. Her letter engrossed her. It had begun several days back. Letters dated February. Line. Excuse me. Oh, Tila's pointing out, yeah, men got to remarry quickly, women had to wait, but they also had to get married for safety. Basically, if you're a woman, you're screwed. LMAO. Yep.
Yeah.
All true. "My dear Anne, I make no apology for my silence, because I know how little people think of letters in such a place as Bath. You must be a great deal too happy to care for Uppercross, which, as you well know, affords little to write about. We have had a very dull Christmas. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove had not had one dinner party all the holidays. I do not reckon the haters as anybody."
Wow.
Again, the hater.
Yep.
"The holidays, however, are over at last. I believe no children ever had such long ones. I am sure I had not. The house was cleared yesterday, except of the little Harvilles, but you will be surprised to hear that they have never gone home. Mrs. Harville must be an odd mother to part with them so long." Excuse me, Mary, you're the one who insisted on staying in Lyme for like an extra week when everyone else were like, "Don't you want to return to your kids?"
Yeah.
Ugh. Again, Mary, being the worst.
Yes.
"I do not understand it. They're not at all nice children, in my opinion. But Mrs. Musgrove seems to like them quite as well, if not better, than her grandchildren. What dreadful weather we have had. It may not be felt in Bath with your nice pavements, but in the country it is of some consequence. I have not had a creature call on me since the second week in January, except Charles Hayter, who has been calling much oftener than was welcome. Between ourselves, I think it a great pity Henrietta did not remain at Lyme as long as Louisa. It would have kept her a little out of his way. The carriage is gone today to bring Louisa and the Harvilles tomorrow. We are not asked to dine with them, however, till the day after. Mrs. Musgrove is so afraid of being fatigued by the journey, which is not very likely considering the care that will be taken of her." Oh, Mary, wow. I didn't realize you were a brain doctor.
Seriously.
"And it would be much more convenient to me to dine there tomorrow." Oh, did one think to take into consideration Mary's convenience?
How no one think of Mary?
How very dare.
Well, apparently her father doesn't, so there's that.
Oh, well, it's true. "I am glad you find Mr. Elliot so agreeable, and wish I could be acquainted with him too, but I have my usual luck. I am always out of the way when anything desirable is going on. Always the last of my family to be noticed. What an immense time Mrs. Clay has been staying with Elizabeth. Does she never mean to go away? Oh, but perhaps if she were to leave the room vacant, we might not be invited."
If she were to leave the room. Oh, like if she were to leave Bath. Like where she's staying with the.
Oh, is she saying, saying like, maybe it's not Mrs. Clay that's preventing us from being invited? They might not invite us anyway.
Yeah, that seems to be what she's saying.
Yeah, because she follows it by saying, "Let me know what you think of this. I do not expect my children to be asked, you know. I can leave them at the great house very well for a month or 6 weeks."
Wow.
Literally, you were just
complaining about.
Oh, also Tila points out, wasn't she the first married? So very much not the last noticed.
Yeah.
She would never think of that. "I have at this moment heard that the Crofts are going to Bath almost immediately. They think the Admiral Gowdy. Charles heard it quite by chance. They have not the civility to give me any notice or offer to take anything. I do not think they approve at all as neighbors. We see nothing of them, and this is really an instance of gross inattention. Charles joins me in love and everything proper. Yours affectionately, Mary." But this is Mary M with a line, but it's like, we know her last name is Musgrove.
Maybe that's how she actually signed it.
Yeah, did people actually sign their names that way?
Maybe.
Because I feel like usually when there's a line, it's because they're avoiding saying a year or a person's name or a location.
Right, yeah.
the name of a regiment or something like that. But this is weird because it's how...
Maybe people just did.
You do think then, at that point, she'd just sign it Mary.
Yeah.
You know, your sister.
You know that, Mary.
Oh, and then apparently this is a P.S. I am sorry to say I'm very far from well, and Jemima has just told me that the butcher says there is a bad sore throat very much about. I dare say I shall catch it, and my sore throats, you know, are always worse than anybody's.
Of course. Based on
no one knows what Mary suffers.
But then she never complains.
So ended the first part, which had been afterwards put into an envelope containing nearly as much more. I kept my letter open, that I might send you word how Louisa bore her journey, and now I am extremely glad I did, having a great deal to add. In the first place, I had a note from Mrs. Croft yesterday, offering to convey anything to you. A very kind, friendly note indeed, addressed to me, just as it ought. I shall therefore be able to make my letter as long as I like. The Admiral does not seem very ill, and I sincerely hope Bath will do him all the good he wants. I shall be truly glad to have him back again. Our neighborhood cannot bear such a pleasant family. Now that they've gone to her and given her just a tiny bit of attention, she's like, oh, what delightful people.
Yeah.
I like them very much.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, indeed.
But now for Louisa. I have something to communicate that will astonish you not a little. She and the Harvilles came on Tuesday very safely, and in this evening we went to ask how she did, and we were rather surprised not to find Captain Benwick of the party, for he had been invited as well as the Harvilles. And what do you think was the reason? Neither more nor less than his being in love with Louisa, and not choosing to venture to Uppercross till he had an answer from Mr. Musgrove. For it was all settled between him and her before she came away, and he had written to her father by Captain Harville. True, upon my honour. Are you not astonished? Are you not diverted? I should be surprised at least if you ever received a hint of it, for I never did. Mrs. Musgrove protests solemnly that she knew nothing of the matter. We are all very well pleased, however, for though it is not equal to her marrying Captain Wentworth, it is infinitely better than Charles Hayter. Wait.
Who is still going to marry Henrietta?
Yeah. Seems like
what? I don't follow.
I guess she's saying like, well, it's not as good as if she had married Captain Wentworth, but at least she did better than her sister. You know what I'm saying?
I guess that must be it. Yeah, which is whatever. It's Mary.
It's Mary. And Mr. Musgrove has written his consent, and Captain Benwick is expected today. Mrs. Harville says her husband feels a good deal on his poor sister's account, but however, Louisa is a great favourite with both. Indeed, Mrs. Harville and I quite agree that we love her the better for having nursed her. I'm sure you did a lot for her, Mary. Charles wonders what Captain Wentworth will say, but if you remember, I never thought him attached to Louisa. I never could see anything of it. And this is the end, you see, of Captain Benwick's being supposed to be an admirer of yours. How Charles could take such a thing into his head was always incomprehensible to me. I hope he will be more agreeable now. Certainly not a great match for Louisa Musgrove, but 1,000,000 times better than marrying among the haters. Mary need not have feared her sisters being... Oops, I just accidentally closed the entire damn book.
Whoops.
Just my hands stopped working. There we go. Mary need not have feared her sisters being in any degree prepared for the news. She had never in her life been more astonished. Captain Benwick and Louisa Musgrove. It was almost too wonderful for belief, and it was with the greatest effort that she could remain in the room, preserve an air of calmness, and answer the common questions of the moment. Happily for her, they were not many. Sir Walter wanted to know whether the Crofts travelled with 4 horses, and whether they were likely to be situated in such a part of Bath as it might suit Miss Elliot and himself to visit in, but had little curiosity beyond. Yes, how many horses they travel with is the most important thing, obviously.
Definitely.
And then how much where they're staying will affect how you look. You know, obviously, these are the things that matter.
Yes.
Oh, how is Mary? Said Elizabeth, and without waiting for an answer. And pray, what brings the Crofts to Bath? They come on the Admiral's account. He is thought to be gouty. Gout and decrepitude, said Sir Walter. Poor old gentleman. Wow. I think he's younger than you.
I think
Pretty
so,
sure he's younger than you. Yeah. Have they any acquaintance here? Asked Elizabeth. I do not know, but I can hardly suppose that, at Admiral Croft's time of life and in his profession, he should not have many acquaintance in such a place as this. I suspect, said Sir Walter coolly, that Admiral Croft will be best known in Bath as the renter of Kellynch Hall. Elizabeth, may we venture to present him and his wife in Laura Place? Oh, no, I think not. Situated as we are with Lady Dalrymple, cousins, we ought to be careful not to embarrass her with acquaintance she might not approve. If we were not related, it would not signify. But as cousins, she would feel scrupulous as to any proposal of ours. We had better leave the Crofts to find their own level. There are several odd-looking men walking about here who I am told are sailors. The Crofts will associate with them. Wow. What? What? Honestly, I'm amazed that Sir Walter even asked. Elizabeth's opinion. I would assume he'd immediately be like, "Well, of course, women bring them to Laura." Yeah. He's not even sure if he can visit them himself. And it's interesting that he would ask Elizabeth's opinion.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, I've seen some weird guys hanging around, and I think they're probably sailors, so I'm sure the Crofts will just associate with them because, Admiral.
Yeah.
This was Sir Walter and Elizabeth's share of interest in the letter. When Mrs. Clay had paid her tribute of more decent attention in an enquiry after Mrs. Charles Musgrove and her fine little boys, Anne was at liberty. See, Mrs. Clay at least knows to say, and how is your sister? And how are her children? She's at least got that propriety going for her.
She knows what's expected.
Yeah. Maybe it's just because she doesn't feel at liberty. But if she was a slightly shittier person, she could just follow Elizabeth's lead,
Yeah.
And think herself too important or whatever to ask after Mary or something. It's a low bar, but she cleared it.
Yeah.
But she cleared it.
Yeah.
It's a low bar, but since Sir Walter and Elizabeth didn't even clear it, and they are related to Mary.
Yeah.
In her own room, she tried to comprehend it. Well might Charles wonder how Captain Wentworth would feel. Perhaps he had quitted the field, had given Louisa up, had ceased to love, had found he did not love her. She could not endure the idea of treachery or levity or anything akin to ill usage between him and his friend. She could not endure that such a friendship as theirs should be severed unfairly. Captain Benwick and Louisa Musgrove, the high-spirited, joyous-talking Louisa Musgrove, and the dejected, thinking, feeling, reading Captain Benwick, seemed each of them everything that would not suit the other. Their minds most dissimilar. Where could have been the attraction? The answer soon presented itself. It had been in situation. They had been thrown together several weeks. They had been living in the same small family party. Since Henrietta's coming away, they must have been depending almost entirely on each other, and Louisa, just recovering from illness, had been in an interesting state, and Captain Benwick was not inconsolable. That was a point which Anne had not been able to avoid suspecting before. And instead of drawing the same conclusion as Mary from the present course of events, they served only to confirm the idea of his having felt some dawning of tenderness towards herself. I mean, yeah, I think that is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Just because he kind of had a little fondness for Anne does not mean that he couldn't, once she is gone from his circle, not just out, not in the town anymore, but he had no reason to think he'd ever see her again.
Yeah.
It does not mean that he wouldn't then also fall in love.
Well, and I think she's also thinking of Mary had previously said in protesting that Captain Benwick wasn't interested in Anne.
Yeah.
Mary's argument was that he was inconsolable over the loss of his fiance?
Yeah, fiance, yeah.
And clearly it would be inappropriate and he wouldn't ever be thinking of addresses to another woman. This is Mary we're talking about. So
yeah. And also just because he might have a little bit of fondness or tenderness for a woman doesn't mean he's like, oh, better marry her.
Yeah.
Better lock that shit down.
Yeah.
She did not mean, however, to derive much more from it than to gratify her vanity than Mary might have allowed. She was persuaded that any tolerably pleasing young woman who had listened and seemed to feel for him would have received the same compliment. He had an affectionate heart. He must love somebody. Anne. I mean, that's probably that's a better way for her to think of it. Yeah. Kind of to be like, oh, he was fond of me, but he probably would have been fond of anyone who was, and admittedly, they didn't know each other very well. They
didn't hang out that long.
Yeah. I'm sure a certain amount of his affection for her was just that he felt like he could talk to her.
Yeah.
It wasn't too lively or too haughty or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, you could also make a case that Louisa's recently had a concussion, but
yeah,
I'm sure those jokes are flying around in the background anyway.
She saw no reason against their being happy. Louisa had fine naval fervor to begin with, and they would soon grow more alike. He would gain cheerfulness, and she would learn to be an enthusiast for Scott and Lord Byron. Nay, that was probably already. Of course they had fallen in love over poetry. The idea of Louisa Musgrove turned into a person of literary taste and sentimental reflection was amusing, but she had no doubt of its being so. The day at Lyme, the fall from the cob, might influence her health, her nerves, her courage, her character to the end of her life, as thoroughly as it appeared to have influenced her fate. That is also a very good point.
Yeah.
Like, she was doing this whole, like, oh, I have to be super bold and, like, really strong-willed to show off to Captain
Nothing
Wentworth.
can stop me.
And then she found out, like, oh, I am not invincible.
Yeah.
That's kind of...
Not always a good idea.
And also, I almost died!
Yeah.
It's serious. The conclusion of the whole was that if the woman who had been sensible of Captain Wentworth's merits could be allowed to prefer another man, there was nothing in the engagement to excite lasting wonder. And if Captain Wentworth lost no friend by it, certainly nothing to be regretted. No, it was not regret which made Anne's heart beat in spite of herself and brought the color into her cheeks when she thought of Captain Wentworth, unshackled and free. She had some feelings which she was ashamed to investigate. They were too much like joy, senseless joy. She longed to see the Crofts, but when the meeting took place, it was evident that no rumor of the news had yet reached them. The visit of ceremony was paid and returned, and Louisa Musgrove was mentioned, and Captain Wentworth too, without even half a smile. The Crofts had placed themselves in lodgings in Gay Street. I want to live there! That sounds great! Perfectly to Sir Walter's satisfaction. He was not at all ashamed of the acquaintance, and did, in fact, think and talk a great deal more about the Admiral than the Admiral ever thought or talked about him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Crofts knew quite as many people in Bath as they wished for, and considered their intercourse with the Elliots as a mere matter of form, and not in the least likely to afford them any pleasure. They brought with them their country habit of being almost always together. He was ordered to walk to keep off the gout, and Mrs. Croft seemed to go shares with him in everything, and to walk for her life to do him good. Anne saw them wherever she went. Lady Russell took her out of in her carriage almost every morning, and she never failed to think of them, and never failed to see them. Knowing their feelings as she did, it was a most attractive picture of happiness to her. She always watched them as long as she could, delighted to fancy she understood what they might be talking of, as they walked along in happy independence, equally delighted to see the Admiral's hearty shake of the hand when he encountered an old friend, and observe their eagerness of conversation when occasionally forming in a little knot of the Navy, Mrs. Croft looking as intelligent as keen as any of the officers around her. Oh, Erin, I'm so glad that I could accompany you cooking dinner.
Aww.
Pleasant background to your cooking adventures. I don't know what I was trying to say there. Anne was too much engaged with Lady Russell to be often walking herself. But it so happened that one morning, about a week or 10 days after the Crofts' arrival, it suited her best to leave her friend, or her friend's carriage, in the lower part of town, and return alone to Camden Place. And in walking up Milsom Street, she had the good fortune to meet with the Admiral. He was standing by himself at a print shop window with his hands behind him, in earnest contemplation of some print, and she not only might have passed him unseen, but was obliged to touch as well as address him before she could catch his notice. There we go. There's him at the print shop window, and there's her having to touch him to get his attention. Again, an illustration of something that's actually happening in the story.
What?
Astonishing. When he did perceive and acknowledge her, however, it was done with all his usual frankness and good humor. Ah, is it you? Oh, thank you. This is treating me like a friend. Here I am, you see, staring at a picture. I can never get by this shop without stopping. What a thing here is, by the way of a boat. Do look at it. Did you ever see the like? What queer fellows your fine painters must be, to think that anybody would venture their lives in such a shapeless old cockle shell as that. And yet here are two gentlemen stuck up in it mightily at their ease, and looking about them at the rocks and mountains as if they were not to be upset the next moment, which they certainly must be. I wonder where that boat was built, laughing heartily. I would not venture over a horse pond in it. Well, turning away. Now, where are you bound? Can I go anywhere for you or with you? Can I be of any use? Sorry, I find this little conversation really entertaining because I never knew about the fact that boats, tall ships, like pirate ship style, when they are depicted, there is a very, very common mistake that people make when drawing it, which is they make the sails going forward, right? Being blown forward, right? The sails are going like this as the wind is coming this way, but the little pennant flag at the top is always pointing back as if the wind is going that way.
Yeah, that's true.
And I got to tell you, now that I've noticed it, I can't unnotice it, but when it's right, it still looks wrong to me.
Right, yeah.
For some reason, it seems like the pennant should be pointed the other direction.
Visual cliche.
Anyway, so now you know to look for that. Thanks to Lucy Bellwood, excellent boat artist, among other things. Comic artist and tall ship sailor and general adventure artist.
Oh, cool.
She's very cool. She lives in Portland. She's awesome. Highly recommend checking out her stuff. She draws boats with the flags going the right direction. I'm sure she would enjoy this little passage if she's not read this book. None, I thank you. Unless you give me the pleasure of your company the little way our road lies together. I'm going home. That I will, with all my heart, and farther too. Yes, we will have a snug walk together, and I have something to tell you as we go along. There, take my arm, that's right. I do not feel comfortable if I have not a woman there. Lord, what a boat it is! Taking a last look at the picture, as they had begun to be in motion.
He can't help himself.
Oh, yes, no, please. I feel weird walking by myself. I'm too used to having a wife around. It's just cute. He's just a cute guy.
He is.
Did you say you have something to tell me, sir? Oh, yes, I have, presently. Pop, here comes a friend, Captain Brigden. I shall only say how do you do as we pass, however. I shall not stop. How do you do? Brigden stares to see anybody with me but my wife. She, poor soul, is tied by the leg. She has a blister on one of her heels as large as a 3-shilling piece. Ew. If you look across the street, you shall see Admiral Brand coming down with his brother. Shabby fellows, both of them. I'm glad they're not on this side of the way. Sophie could not bear them. They played me a pitiful trick once. Got away with some of my best men. I will tell you the whole story another time. There comes old Sir Archibald Drew and his grandson. Look, he sees us. He kisses his hand to you. Takes you for my wife. The peace has come too soon for that yunker. Yunker? Poor old Sir Archibald. Well, how do you like Bath, Miss Elliot? It suits us very well. We are always meeting with some old friend or other. The street's full of them. Every morning, we're sure to have plenty of chat, and then we get away from them all and shut ourselves in our lodgings, draw in our chairs, and are as snug as we were at Kellynch, or as we used to be even at North Yarmouth or Deal. We do not like our lodgings here the worse, I can tell you, for putting us in mind of those we had first had at North Yarmouth. The wind blows through one of the cupboards just in the same way. He's just adorable. Yeah. I also love that he apparently knows everyone in Bath.
Yeah.
Whereas Sir Walter is like, well, I would assume he's primarily known in Bath as the man who rents Kellynch. Why would anyone know if otherwise?
Yeah.
Oh, he's like a turkey. Sir. I just imagine him having a waddle for some reason.
Yes.
Good times. When they had got a little farther, Anne ventured to press again for what he had to communicate. She had hoped when clear of Milsom Street to have her curiosity gratified, but she was still obliged and quiet at Belmont. And as she was not really Mrs. Croft, she must let him have his own way. As soon as they were fairly ascending Belmont, he began. Well, now you shall hear something that will surprise you. But first of all, you must tell me the name of the young lady I am going to talk about. That young lady, you know, that we have all been so concerned for. The Miss Musgrove that all this has been happening to. Her Christian name. I always forget her Christian name.
I'm going to tell you a story about someone, but you're going to have to remind me what her name is.
Yes, first. I know. Anne had been ashamed to appear to comprehend so soon as she really did, but now she could safely suggest the name of Louisa. Aye, Miss Louisa Musgrove, that is the name. I wish young ladies would not had not such a number of fine Christian names. I should never be out of, if they were all Sophies or something of that sort. Well, this Miss Louisa, we all thought, you know, was to marry Frederick. He was courting her week after week. The only wonder was what they could be waiting for, till the business at Lyme came. Then, indeed, it was clear enough they must wait till her brain was set to right. But even then, there was something odd in the way of going on. Instead of staying at Lyme, he went off to Plymouth, and then he went off to see Edward. When we came back from Minehead, he was gone down to Edwards, and there he has been ever since. We have seen nothing of him since November. Even Sophie could not understand it. But now the matter has taken the strangest turn of them all, for this young lady, this same Miss Musgrove, instead of being to marry Frederick, is to marry James Benwick. You know James Benwick. I am a little acquainted with Captain Benwick. Well, she is to marry him. Nay, most likely they are married already, for I do not know what they should be waiting for, or what they should wait for. I thought Captain Benwick a very pleasing young man, said Anne, and I understand he bears an excellent character. Oh, yes, there is not a word to be said against James Benwick. He is not only a commander, he is only a commander, it is true, made last summer, and these are bad times for getting on, but he has not another fault that I know of. An excellent, good-hearted fellow, I assure you. Very active, zealous officer, too, which is more than you would think for, perhaps, for that soft sort of manner does not do him justice. Indeed, you are mistaken there, sir. I should never augur want of spirit from Captain Benwick's manners. I thought them particularly pleasing, and I will answer for it that they would generally please. Well, ladies are the best judges. But James Benwick is rather too piano for me. And sorry, this is really funny. I've never heard anybody use that as an adjective, especially towards a person. And I especially because now we refer to the instrument as piano, where they would refer to it as a pianoforte. So it makes sense for him to use piano in the sense of the musical term of meaning choir. Right, yeah. In case you didn't know.
I thank you for reminding me. I knew it had some meaning, but I did not remember.
I can't remember. I don't know exactly what the different levels are. Like, I know pianissimo, I think, is below that also in terms of like
probably
quietness. There's a bunch of different words for how loud you should be. Okay.
Yeah.
In music, Italian words, and I haven't been in a
right.
choir and had to read music in a very long time. So.
Isn't it fortissimo is the most
I
expressive?
think so.
The loudest.
Yeah.
That would make sense. So. The pianissimo would be the lowest.
So little. Oh, Tila is trained in opera and classical choir. Well.
What? That's amazing.
I am not classically trained, but I was in concert choirs all through from. Well, I've been in choirs since I was like a toddler, basically, up until college, but I have not.
Grasshopper.
Yeah, knee-high.
And you have sung some bel canto.
Yes, well, that's very true. Petite.
Yes.
Anyway, but yes, I have not been in a choir, and you add more ecs if you want to say more. So really effing loud is fortissimo. Fortissimo. Whoa, I don't know how to say that properly.
Which is Italian for really effing loud.
Really effing loud. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, just for him referring to Captain Benwick's piano is really cute.
Yeah.
And though very likely it is all our partiality, Sophie and I cannot help thinking Frederick's manners better than his. There is something about Frederick more to our taste. Anne was caught. She had only meant to oppose the too common idea of spirit and gentleness being incompatible with each other, not at all to represent Captain Benwick's manners as the very best they could possibly be. And after a little hesitation, she was beginning to say, I was not entering into any comparison of the two friends, but the Admiral interrupted her with, and the thing is certainly true. It is not a mere bit of gossip. We have had it from Frederick himself. His sister had a letter from him yesterday, in which he tells us of it, and he had just had it in a letter from Harville, written upon the spot from Uppercross. I fancy they are all at Uppercross. This was an opportunity which Anne could not resist. She said, therefore, I hope, Admiral, I hope there is nothing in the style of Captain Wentworth's letter to make you and Mrs. Croft particularly uneasy. It did certainly seem last autumn as if there were an attachment between him and Louisa Musgrove, but I hope it may be understood to have worn out on each side equally and without violence. I hope his letter does not breathe the spirit of an ill-used man. Not at all, not at all. There's not an oath or a murmur from beginning to end. Anne looked down to hide her smile. No, Frederick is not a man to whine and complain. He has too much spirit for that. If the girl likes another man better, it is very fit she should have him. Certainly. But what I mean is that I hope there is nothing in Captain Wentworth's manner of writing to make you suppose he thinks himself ill-used by his friend, which might appear, you know, without it being absolutely said. I should be very sorry that such a friendship as has subsisted between him and Captain Benwick should be destroyed, or even wounded by a circumstance of this sort. Yes, I understand you. But there is nothing at all of that nature in the letter. He did not give the least fling at Benwick. There's not so much as say, I wonder at it. I have my own reason for wondering at it. No, you would not guess from his way of writing that he had ever thought of this Miss, what's her name? Forsyth. I can't remember her last name at this point. Well, he very handsomely hopes they will be happy together, and there is nothing very unforgiving in that, I think. Anne did not receive the perfect conviction which the Admiral meant to convey, but it would have been useless to press the inquiry farther. She therefore satisfied herself with commonplace remarks or quiet attention, and the Admiral had it all his own way. Poor Frederick, he said at last. Now he must begin all over again with someone else. I think we must get him to Bath. Sophie must write or beg him to come to Bath. There are pretty girls enough here, I'm sure. It would be of no use to go to Uppercross again, for that other Miss Musgrove, I think, is bespoke by her cousin, the young parson. Do not you think, Miss Elliot, that we had better try to get him to Bath? Oh my, what's that over there? What in the world can that be? Anyway.
Oh, I swore I saw something.
Anyway, that's the end of the chapter. I love that the chapter just ends with him saying, don't you think, Miss Elliot? Because we know exactly what Miss Elliot thinks.
Yes.
Or as much as she knows herself. Right?
And how awkward that
question is.
Yes.
Sorry, I went a little bit over today, but I knew I was getting close to the end of the chapter, so I just figured I'd barrel through it. I just kept talking.
Plus, he's just so cute.
Tila adds that non-audible is pianissimo.
Really? Wow. How did they?
I was having a hard time reading what she was writing, but she said you had it like the first time. Italian eliminates the double vowel because language is wild. Huh. No, I learned something about Italian today.
Cool.
Pianissimo means don't even fucking play, I
guess. It's like the silent meow.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Tila, for all the educational information about Italian music words.
Yes. I appreciate it too, Tila. I like opera.
I confess, I never really gotten into opera. I have seen a few, but not since I was a high schooler and could occasionally get free passes. For like educational purposes.
Hella expensive. I've never been to see one.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah, they used to have this the Seattle Opera used to do a thing where students would be invited to like the final dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
And if they had like a set number of tickets, and then if you want to go, you had to tell the music, the choir director or the band director or whatever, that you were interested. And in order to go, you had to go to a thing where one day at school during lunch, you went to the band room and somebody from the production came and gave you a little like talk and answered questions, which actually was awesome because they kind of explained the story.
Yeah.
The one that I specifically remember was...
Usually they require some explanation.
Oh, shit. I went to 2, and one was in English.
Oh.
Which is not... There are not a lot of operas in English.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. But the other one was... oh, dang it. I always forget the name. Anyway, the other one was in Italian. But it was super, super useful to have someone come ahead of time and explain the plot so you knew what was happening, especially because the super titles were malfunctioning.
Oh, yeah.
At the dress rehearsal. So,
yeah.
Anyway, but it was very cool to get to see it. Quite an ordeal, an opera. Anyway, yeah, it was just fun to be able to ask someone questions about what it's like to work in opera. I think it was usually like the stage manager or somebody would come to tell us kind of what the deal was. Anyway, it was very cool.
I did have a roommate in college who had like season tickets. I think it was a similar sort of.
Oh, but it was
not quite the same thing, but it was like somehow discounted
for students.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have. Yeah.
And like most things, it is cheaper overall. If you're going to go to every single one, it is cheaper overall to get the package.
Oh yeah, sure.
So she must have had some kind of thing. Either that or her parents were paying for it because she went to a lot of operas.
I know I haven't been to the opera since then.
Yeah.
Is it Vanessa? Is there an opera called Vanessa? Hey, Tila, you're my opera expert.
Yeah.
Is there an English language opera called Vanessa? Because if so, I have seen it. I don't remember anything about it, though. Anywho, it was weird to hear opera sung in English, though, because you're just so used to the idea of it being in Italian or German, but usually.
Yeah. Typically, yeah.
Yeah. It's just weird to be like, I understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
Anywho, that's it for today, I guess. We're done. I hope you all had a good weekend. Thanks for coming back. Michelle says I'm correct. That Google says there is an English language opera called Vanessa. I remembered. Yay. Ooh. Anyway, yeah, I hope you guys all have a good night. Thanks for tuning in. I'm very sweaty now. Had to turn off all the fans.
Yes.
For the live stream. I'm very warm. Tina said she saw a modern opera that was in Brazilian Portuguese, which was an amazing but weird and was a protest opera. Wow.
I mean, people are still writing operas.
Yeah, so. Yeah. There's no reason you can't keep writing operas.
Yeah.
Yeah, my experience is more with rock operas. Or those kind of like musicals that are sort of like operas, like Phantom of the Opera and Miss Saigon.
Yeah.
Those musicals that just have like a lot of sung dialogue. They're like kind of somewhere.
Yeah.
Between, they're not a rock opera, but they're not quite an actual opera. Anyway, yeah. I don't know. I bet there's a technical term for those. And I have some familiarity with some operettas. Gilbert and Sullivan, that sort of thing.
Oh, yes.
But anywho, yeah, like I feel like Hamilton would also kind of fall into that category, right? Because I believe, I haven't seen it or heard the whole soundtrack, but I believe that a lot of the dialogue in that is sung or rapped as well. So, anywho, this is not a stream for talking about general stuff about opera.
Completely changed
We're totally off the rails now. Anyway, yes, thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you all had a great weekend. Hope you have a nice evening. I'll see you tomorrow, 6:30 Pacific. Tila says, technically purists would classify all of that as musical theater, but there must be a term that's at least bandied about, right? For like that sort of musical, right? Because there's a world of difference between Phantom of the Opera and like the Music Man, right?
Yeah.
They are effectively different genres. Anywho, that's it. I'm going to stop before someone else says something interesting about musicals and operas, okay? Bye.